All right, so today's class is going to be, we're going to continue talking about listings. Oh wait, housekeeping, before I do that. Few things, I put the link in the chat for scheduling your May check-in with me, your 15-minute check-in. If you have not onboarded yet, or you're like 1 or 2 weeks until you have to be onboarded, you do not have to schedule this check-in. These are only for if you've been onboarded for a minute. Scheduling your May goals, like our May action, that's the thing that you're gonna equal. Everyone has to schedule a check-in. Everyone can schedule it unless you are not fully onboarded yet, or just onboarded with like 1 or 2 weeks. Tess also sent out a link in an email for you guys to register for a class she's doing, for DocuSign templates. So if you've ever had issues with like, I don't know how to use DocuSign, I don't know how to do contracts in DocuSign, making sure that all the fields are correct, he's going to do a class to show you and walk through that. You have templates for all the things. Or even if a lot of our agents have issues like rentals, and make sure to get paid on their rentals. So she's going to be going through all of that, but you have to register for it. It's mandatory. It will not be recorded just because she just wants to like walk you guys through it. She needs to do so. So make sure that you check your email for that, register for that Zoom. I believe it's on the 12th. So that may be like Monday or something. Register for that. She wanted to give you guys enough notice in advance so that you can make sure you're available for that call. Okay, so we are going to continue with listings. Seller's disclosure, these are such a pain for us buyer-loving agents because we go on the MLS and we go to the documents and there are no disclosures, which they literally should be there immediately when you put up a listing. A listing, you should have seller disclosures in the MLS, and a lot of agents do not do that. That's number one, right? But our PC agents are going to make sure that when they add a listing to the MLS, you have your property disclosure and your land-based paint disclosure immediately when you upload the listing. If not at the moment, like maybe later that evening, but like it needs to be uploaded that day when you put up a listing. But more importantly, the legal ramifications and all the terrible things that happen when these disclosures are not filled out to the best of your client's abilities and to their knowledge. All right, they are required, and these are the easiest way to get these forms completed. That's what we're going to go over. The importance of them and then how to get them completed, hopefully without too many tears from the So first, what is a seller disclosure? A seller disclosure is a legally required document that outlines known facts and defects about the property. Think of it as a property's resume. Okay, it tells the story every buyer deserves to hear. They are required in most states to protect both parties in the transaction. Now, when my buyer clients are looking at listings and I send them the documents from the MLS, I always explain to them, hey, yes, the seller should put out as much information that they know about the property when they fill out this disclosure. However, there's no one checking if they added everything to the disclosure that they know, right? No one knows what the seller does because I know about their home. It is not very common for sellers to just get an inspection on their home when they're listed, right? It seems like a good idea, but they're like, hey, I'm not gonna spend an extra $700 to get an inspection. But also, they may feel like if I get an inspection and now I know we have termites and now I know the roof is leaking and now I know the plumbing is backed up, now I have to disclose these things and then I have to get them fixed. So that's another reason why a lot of sellers don't do inspections prior to listing. But so that's the other thing. Most of the information on the seller disclosure is just their knowledge from just living in the home for whatever duration they live there. However, it may not be as thorough, which is why we highly recommend our buyer clients to receive the inspection. And while a seller may not know everything about the home, what they do know about the home, they are legally required to do so. Even if it's something like termites, right? You may say, oh, I don't want to put termites on the disclosure, number one, you get termite remediation. But outside of that, if nothing else, the buyer is aware of it and can make an informed decision. It's not fair and it's not okay to not list it and you know about it, and now the buyer purchased the home, and now once moving into the home, now they have to pay whatever $1,000, $600 for termite remediation, which is not something they signed up for, and they could have made a better informed decision prior to if they just knew about it. So disclosing information on the form, on the property disclosure is not there to hinder a buyer. It's there to inform them so they can make a proper decision. Right, why they're important: promote transparency and build trust, protect the seller from future lawsuits, because that's another thing. Should it come about after closing that, something happens to the home, and there is a way for the buyer to believe that, hey, the seller had to have known about this, or I believe the seller knew about this, they can file a lawsuit, and now, you're paying thousands of dollars anyway, and you could have just disclosed the information and or remediated the issue, solved the issue. Disclosures empower your buyer, again, to make informed decisions and a smooth path to closing. Because what a lot of agents don't know is that you're not only responsible for disclosing information about the property up until you get it under contract. You are obligated, or your seller is obligated to disclose any information all the way until closing time, until settlement. So even after they've gone under contract, if something starts leaking or you find out there's termites the day after you sign a contract, under contract, you are still obligated to then go to the buyer and let them know this information. Even if it wasn't on the initial property disclosure, once you find that information out, you still have to let them know. You're still responsible for it. Common items field or disclosure: structural issues. There may be some beams missing in the basement, right? If there's anything going on with the deck, that might be something that's in the disclosure. Water intrusion, roof leaks, termite damage, electrical and plumbing, pest insurance claims, HVAC, central air, heating, appliances, zoning, HOA. For some buyers, yes, this would be a red flag. No, I not want to move forward with this. For other buyers, it's just about being informed. They may say, oh, my father's contract, the plumbing is an issue. Or, I worked with someone before for electrical issues, that's not a problem. But they can't make that decision if they did not know about it. Sellers must be 100% honest. Why? Because omissions lead to legal struggle. A lot of times there is a way for a buyer to kind of trace that the seller has to have known about this issue, and if so, they go to McCurry, let them know they want to file a lawsuit. And whether you're on the buyer or seller side, you do not want anything to do with it. Because I've been on the buyer side where the buyer found out like something was going on with the house in the basement. And even though it obviously wasn't on me because I wasn't the seller's or the seller's agent, it does give you like this feeling of like, man, like, I just helped my client buy this house, and there's something wrong with it. And you feel like there's nothing you can do about it, because honestly, you can't, right? You can help them, you can make sure they have all the documents, all the evidence when you're in, but it's something that's really out of your hands. It's not a good feeling. If it's something that can be implemented. Lawsuits and lost profits are common when sellers conceal info. For honesty, if you know about it, disclose it. That's it. Pretty simple. We're going to watch the video, and she better explains kind of the risks that go along with the misrepresentation online. So disclosure.
Real properties edition is consistently among the top ratings against real estate professionals. Typically, an unhappy purchaser brings a claim who discovered a physical defect or other undisclosed condition they believe should have been disclosed prior to purchase. To reduce the risk of costly misrepresentation claim, it's critical that real estate professionals are familiar with full disclosure laws. Real estate professionals generally have a duty to disclose any known material fact under state law. When pursuant to Article 2 of the Realtor Code of Ethics, realtors must disclose material facts, which are factors that a reasonable buyer would consider important in deciding whether and on what terms to purchase the property. In addition, most states require some form of a seller's disclosure. Factors about known defects and other property conditions, such as water damage, mechanical problems, and structural issues. Failure to disclose can lead to misrepresentation claims, ranging from fraud to negligence, and in some states, innocent misrepresentation.
Let me share my screen, I'm so sorry, guys. Thanks for taking. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Hold on. Thank you. I will, it's only 3 minutes. Back to the video.
Misrepresentation
Maggie,
of property
this video.
is consistently among the top rated against real estate professionals. Typically, an unhappy purchaser brings a claim.
Hold on, everybody else know, can you see the video? Maggie, okay.
Discovered a physical defect or other undisclosed condition they believe should have been disclosed prior to purchase. To reduce the risk of a costly misrepresentation claim, it's critical that the real estate professional are familiar with applicable disclosure laws. Real estate professionals generally owe a duty to disclose any known material facts in law. When pursuant to Article 2 of the Realtor Code of Ethics, realtors must disclose material facts, which are facts that a reasonable buyer would consider important in deciding whether and on what terms to purchase property. In addition, most states require some form of a seller's disclosure before buyers about known defects and other property conditions, such as water damage, mechanical problems, and structural issues. Failure to disclose can lead to misrepresentation claims, ranging from fraud to negligence, and in some states, innocent misrepresentation. A real estate professional commits fraud when they make a statement of material fact, knowing it to be false, and intending a purchaser to rely on the statement, and the purchaser relies on that statement in making the purchase. Negligent misrepresentation arises from a lack of care in obtaining or delivering accurate information to the buyer. For example, when a cursory examination of the property would indicate the seller's statements are incorrect. Negligence claims can involve not only what a real estate professional knew about a property and failed to disclose, but also what they should have known. The price of non-disclosure can be steep. One court awarded $170,000 in punitive damages for a real estate agent's reckless disregard of the truth. In this case, the agent was acting for an investor and was involved in the property during its purchase and subsequent extensive repairs for water intrusion damage. Yet, when completing disclosure of the agent crossed out specific questions regarding water damage and repairs. Although these best practices don't even this representation for failure to disclose. Material known facts and details are disclosed to buyer. Review the seller's disclosure to ensure all questions are answered. And if the seller refuses to disclose a material fact that you know about, you should make the disclosure. Do not complete a disclosure form.
Okay, I wanted to pause it right there because obviously that made me feel like, wait, what, if my seller doesn't want to disclose information, I'm still obligated to disclose that information anymore. And then should they say, I no longer want to work with you, or, that's just something that you kind of have to take on the chin. Because otherwise it's gonna come back to you if that's something that's found out that wasn't here. So that's something that you also have to think about, but it's about integrity. And, you rather have a client who trusts you, trust your judgment, and trust the fact that you disclose the information versus someone who's like, wants to hide it, because 9 times out of 10 is gonna come out in the wash anyway. Okay, I know this is your guys.
The logistics of home inspections are huge. Seller's property disclosure statements are used in court over and over again. Because it is a form of identifying the property to the best of its ability by those who live in it. You need to understand that in Pennsylvania, because you did not live in the property, does not exempt you from filling out a seller's property disclosure statement. Your guys are new. And the green of you comes right through the telephone. The agent on the other side who wants to play games, let's be honest, right here and now. There are many realtors who don't walk the line. They're out for $1 and that's it. You, on the other hand, are gonna take the higher road here. But because you're new, it comes right through the telephone and they're gonna apply with you. Many years ago, I was putting an offer in for my niece. And I asked for the seller disclosure. And it comes through completely blank, but signed. So I called the other agent, I said, but it's fine. Oh, he never lived there. It was an investment 7 years ago, never had stepped foot into it, so he doesn't know anything. And from the tone of this gentleman, I knew he was a little fearful of the seller. I said, you know, if I sent you the Pennsylvania law about seller's disclosure, could you share that with your client? Because the law says he's wrong all day long. You have a law. Of course, but your email. Sent it over 3 hours later, what comes back to me is a fully executed agreement of sale, seller's disclosure. So here's the other thing you must do. When you represent a seller and you're either sitting there on the dining room table, which is the old fashioned way of doing it, but it's not a bad way of doing it. Okay, that helps you develop a rapport with your client rather than what your email and hit send. Regardless how you retrieve that back, every line has to be filled out. And if there's a yes to a question about a deficiency, the form gives a space to explain yourself. That has to be filled out. You as the agent representing the seller, it's your duty to read that entire form and make sure it was filled out in its entirety. When I would sit at the dining room table, I'd hand them page 1, and I would continue filling out other paperwork. They'd give me 1, and then I'd give them page 2, and I would read page 1. With a pencil, I would circle the number, because every line is numbered, just as the agreement of sale, and return it and say, oh, you missed this. And I would take page 2, give them back page 1, and they would make the corrections. I'd read 2, and if need be, and that back, and then go to 3. That's how we sat and did this to make sure it was filled out in its entirety. There is a video, and I think you find it through Facebook, maybe?
On YouTube.
On YouTube, The Mechanics of a Home. I'm not an engineer, I'm not an architect, I'm not an inspector, but I know the basics of a home. There is 2 classes, 2 hour each, for plumbing, electrical, heating, roofing, water penetrations, etc. When you learn and feel more comfortable about the basic mechanics of a home, you can walk in a property, as I did years ago. The raised rancher, and I'm in the basement, lower level, subterranean, half in, half out.
KW and Power Channel too.
And I look along the perimeter, and there's a ring all the way around the perimeter. Mrs. Jones, when it rains, do you get water here? No, I don't get any water. Huh. I said, what the hell is this? Don't look like a fool. Just because they gave you the wrong answer, they need to know you know enough to know that it's the wrong answer. Oh, well, I don't know. It was a poor concrete foundation in the Northeast. I live in the Northeast. I know where all the defects are. And the first place you look is behind the heater, and there was a crack about 5 feet long, and you could see how the soil had left its residue on the crack and where the water had come down. So when there was a heavy rain, that's where the seepage was always coming from. It was that obvious. I said, ma'am, I can't list your home. What do you mean? I said, no. there is a deficiency here, you're choosing not to admit to it or put it on a disclosure, so I'm not the realtor for you. And I packed up my little bag and I left. The logistics, when this goes sideways, first off, you have a $5,000 deductible you gotta pay up front. Let's get started with the nuts and bolts of money here. That's just to get started. The litigation, the time, eat your liver. Walk away. Walk away. Know enough to know, be confident in what you know, so you can go back to this fresh seller who thinks you don't know shit from Shiola, but you do. And stand your own. It's very important. I'm sorry, I'll get.
No,
my
no,
thoughts.
it's, you are the expert at that, and really, I mean, it comes down to experience as well, right? These videos are going to be a great start, and I wish I knew about these videos too when I started, because, you know, we read inspection reports, but again, we are not experts at inspections or plumbing, HVAC, or at least I'm not. So to at least be able to have some general understanding of a home and kind of what's expected is so helpful. But also, as you get more clients, as you go to more homes, you'll learn just things that you can pick out now. When I purchased my first home, I didn't know how to reset like my box of my breaker strip. So I had to YouTube it. So like that's how brand spanking green I am about anything about house learning systems. But again, as you get clients, as you go to classes, as you come to PC classes, watch videos, you'll just become more aware and more abreast of how to point out different things. Like a basement, you know that smell when you walk to a basement, it smells like that moisture, right? Like ask yourself some questions. Say, hey, it's a moisture, the humidifier has ever been leaked. Look around the corners of the basement, but that comes with experience after doing it so many times.
Go to your home inspections.
Yes. Yes, and Vicky said that because it's not necessarily mandatory for an agent to attend your client's home inspections. But again, it helps you just get knowledge about when you're reading a report and you're like, oh wait, you have to call your client, ask your client, what is the inspector talking about in the report, because you didn't attend the inspection. Which, you know, I get, but if you can go, yep.
One trick I learned, because this happened you want to buy into, send the listing agent, especially if you're like, oh, there's no defect, send a picture of what the defect is. From your phone, and be like, so you're telling me an exposure is no water damage or it's not. Then magically, your attitude also changes too, but for some reason, pictures help. If you tag your team leader in the email, that changes people's tune.
Yes, documents everything, and if nothing else, you have, when you're in there, you documented it and you brought it to their attention. Vicky, did you refer to a book, or you were just talking about the mechanics of home videos? Just the videos?
I do a class that YouTube, somebody
Yeah.
filmed. And that is a book that, it's a pretty basic book,
Okay.
and I refer to it in the class. They keep threatening to have me do the class again, but
It's a really good thing.
it is a good place. You learn a lot from a home inspector. Ask questions to your home inspector. Many a time, they're busy doing this and I'm wandering and looking, and I will see a deficiency. And when the home inspector gets to that mechanical, I'll say, Jerry, do me a favor, move that over, something don't seem right there. And he'll look and he'll go, you're right, but it's not right. It's okay to look at something and comment on it. It's okay.
Client. The disabled client needs assistance, advise the client to have a friend or family member help them. Immediately correct any misstatements you or the seller may have made upon learning of the error. Document and keep information received from the seller and provided to the buyer, including answers to questions about the condition of the property. Document any research done on the condition of the property, including the sources of information. Finally, stay informed about any red flags or defects that may be common to properties in the area, such as zoning changes or plumbing issues. Discuss any red flags with the seller and have them investigated. If investigation is inconclusive, alert the buyer to the potential red flag and its consequences. For more information, check out realtor.housing disclosures. Thanks for watching this episode of Radio to the Law.
And Shay, if I should have the exact book, I will put it in the chat. All right, so we just discussed the seller's role, making sure that they fill out the disclosures to the best of their knowledge, the best of their ability. You cannot, as an agent, fill out the disclosure for them. Oh, can you just go and check it in? Or, no, I cannot. You have to do it, and then I can look over to make sure that you did not miss anything. As far as the buyer side, it's very important that you read this carefully. A lot of times, if you are in an open house or you're going to a showing and you see the property disclosure made on the countertop, give it to your buyer, give them an opportunity to read that through, go over it with them. Especially if they're considering putting in an offer, or they're thinking about, hey, I really like this house. Go over the disclosure with them first, because the information that's filled out in the disclosure could be the make or break if they actually want to know. And not just send it to them and say, fine. Like, go through it with them, read through it. Encourage your buyers to read every line of the disclosure, ask questions. It's okay to say that, hey, if your buyer says, I don't know what this means. They say a leak, but it doesn't say where was the leak. It's okay to say, let me call the investigator and get some more information on that. You are not responsible for knowing everything about every kind of agent, Philadelphia, or wherever you're located. However, it's okay to ask questions. Call the investigator and ask, hey, you see this on the disclosure, does the seller have any further information? You can use the disclosure to request repairs or negotiate the price. Look out for red flags like unknown or not expected. I can't say how many disclosures other than that. There's so many unknown check boxes. Maybe you don't know anything about the house. You lived there for 10 years, you know absolutely nothing about the house, right? Call and ask questions.
The whole thing will be marked unknown sometimes, and so the first thing, the very first page could honestly be filled out, especially the first like maybe 5 or 6 questions, could literally be filled out by anyone who has access to public records. So when you get disclosures and who lived in the house last, who's the owner, is the owner, it asks if the owner, the current owner is an engineer or contractor of some sort. How do they not know? How is it unknown? Right, so that's a big red flag that they didn't even look at it, they didn't even attempt to fill it out. And that's where you have to go back to listing agent and say, hey, I don't know if you know this, however, your client did not properly fill that out. And when they say, well, what do you mean? Well, for that, there's some very simple questions like who last occupied the house, is the owner an engineer, contractor, that could have been filled out by you, me, or anyone, but it says unknown. And so that's usually enough for the listing to go, oh, let me go back and talk to my guy. If not, like this is, I don't want to give you more work to try to head, but this is something you have to go broker to broker with sometimes, because I honestly feel that a huge part of it is the lack of education, like you guys are getting right now about how serious this form is. The second thing is pure laziness.
Oh, laziness.
Yeah, the second part, I want to give most people the benefit of the doubt, because you don't know what you don't know sometimes, and not everyone gets 2 coaches, gets 1 coach, let alone you get 2 of us here, right? And you have other team leaders, mentors. Most agents get 0 guidance, and they're literally out here winging it, which is horrifying, because we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I like to give people better down, say they just don't know how serious and how important this form is, and that's why they're filled out so incompletely. But once you have that buyer, it is your responsibility to protect your buyer. You have fiduciary duty to do so, you have ethical duty to do so. And so now, even if that other agent is technically in the wrong, you don't get a pass 2. 2 wrongs don't make a right. So one of you has to be the stand-up professional and make sure that you're protecting your buyer. And if you can't get the answers, then maybe that house is not for your buyer. And there's no such scenario where you push it through and it works out well for you or your buyer in the long term, right?
This is where I value that agents come in.
Yeah.
Your buyer, your buyer will thank you for going that extra step and asking those extra questions. And even if it means that maybe they decide not to put an offer in on the house because they weren't able to get more information, or maybe the information they got, they don't really like that much. They'll thank you, but then, yes, they have to have the home search a little bit longer, but it was worth not spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, whether from a lawsuit or whether having to be prepared to that. Alright, disclosures are not a substitute for inspections. Disclosures are what the seller knows, inspections are what professional finds, like, shared when I first started, a lot of sellers just do not randomly get inspections from them. So, it's okay to say to your buyer, hey, we're gonna read this disclosure, ask some questions, but at the same time, this may not be the full scope of what's going on in the house, which is why we highly recommend for it to get an inspection. Both together give buyers a complete picture of the home, encourage timely scheduling of home inspections. Typically, we have, 10 days to get a home inspection. I always tell my clients the sooner the better. If we can get it in the first 2 or 3 days, depending on your schedule, we need to go ahead and get an inspection. That way, we can ask questions for if we need to come out of contract, so we might get it later. But we have enough time to do so versus getting our inspection today. Now, we can't get reply to inspections back, we can't ask questions for things to do. What question?
I'm stretching.
Oh, it's my fault. I'm trying to say, what's that? All right, what is your duty in the disclosure process? As the seller's agent, you guide sellers to fill out the forms completely and accurately, like we discussed. Never advise your client to withhold information, as deny your integrity goes a long way. Deliver and review disclosures with your buyer promptly if you are the buyer's agent, and then ensure deadlines are met to avoid contract breaches. If you do not have your client's response to inspection in time, you didn't put out an addendum to ask for more time, right? That's when your client could lose out on their deposit because you did not reply to inspections quickly enough. Now they're out $2,500, $3,000.
I want to just bring up something, because just the other day, I had an agent say, oh, I took my clients to these houses, but they didn't like any of them. And I said, well, why didn't they like any of them? Like, what's the price range, and then pictures, this or that. And they're like, well, all of them had a lot of repairs need to be done. They don't want to do any repairs. They just want to move right in. And I said, well, didn't you download the disclosures and send them to your buyers or look over them to make sure? I said, this is exactly why I tell you guys to slow down. I know your clients are excited. They find a house oh, we're going to see what the offer is. Okay, it only takes a couple seconds to download disclosures and look at them, because guess what? You wouldn't have had to drive around and waste time and gas and then these three properties, because the listing agent, it's not their job to take pictures and put the pictures of the leaky faucet or the subfloor that needs to get done because there's a warp or this or that. They're trying to sell the house. They're trying to get as many of us in here as they can so that they can get an offer. And they have to disclose these things on paper, but that doesn't mean they advertise it. So you're not going to know. But if you read the disclosures, and even if you send them to your buyer, don't assume they're going to read them, because they're also petulant and a little lazy. They're going to go see the house. They're so excited. It's your job. The buck stops on you. You can read the disclosures and say, you know what, I know you really love this house, but you guys told me that you needed something move-in ready. You didn't have time or money for any repairs. Right now, this house, it's been disclosed that all the bathrooms are leaking, the shower bed needs to be fixed, the washer and dryer, the ventilation, something's wrong. These type of things. The roof is at the end of its life. Maybe they redid the side, they did all the other stuff inside the house, but the buck stopped at the roof, right? That's a big ticket item repair. So if your buyer's not gonna want that, you should have saved yourself the trip to gas and heartache. When they find out after they walk through it, you know what I mean? And because guess what, worst case scenario, or maybe best case scenario, they buy the house still, even though now they know about these things, because they fell in love with it after you let them walk through. It's something was not really in their criteria. Guess who gets the, goes from 5 to a 1-star review and gets the phone call about wanting to sue someone when those leaking faucets that they tried to convince themselves were not gonna be a big deal, end up being a big deal, costing them more. Maybe there's something that went all the plumbing in the house and the water pressure or whatever, right? And now this little $5 repair is a $5,000 repair. They're going to come for you and KW Power. They're not gonna, if it was disclosed that the amount of the seller, you know what I mean, so that's a headache. So the onus, the accountability and responsibility is you, because you're the one with the professional license.
Yeah, and I would add that to your, before I do a showing with my client, right, we call the listing agent, we ask whatever questions we have, we ask about maybe buyer's agent commission. Also, if you don't see the documents on MLS before you go to the showing, you're on the phone with the agent, ask them for the disclosure before you go. For the very reason such as that you're wasting your time and energy. And then sometimes if you take your client to see the house first, and then you're asking for disclosures, the listing agent will say, oh, just put in an offer and like make it contingent upon getting the disclosure. No, like there can be something on the disclosure and you're wasting all of our time. So write an offer, accept the offer, negotiate an offer, just to get the disclosure from you 3 days from now, and then we don't want the house anymore.
And then you just tied up their EMD too.
Exactly.
They put the offer in, they might have given EMD,
And I've done that so many times, the listing agent is just like, oh, we'll send it, just write an offer. I'm like,
yeah,
Earnest money deposit.
yes.
yeah. You don't want your buyer, because now maybe they put $10,000 down, that's only $10,000 they have to spare to put down on a home. You put it on this home contingent on receiving the seller's disclosures, it takes weeks and weeks. Now guess what you're jammed up with? You're passing your inspection contingency period, your mortgage commitment and everything. So guess what? Your buyer loses $10,000 because you did not protect them. You allowed them to move how they want to move because they fell in love with this house that they should never look at in the first place. That is your bad. That's your bad as the agent, nobody else. It's not even the listing agent's fault that they didn't have the disclosures at that point. You didn't have to move forward. You should have advised for that not to happen. There is no passing the buck. You are responsible for the person you're representing. It doesn't matter what everyone else is doing. It matters what you do with them and how you let them proceed.
And if you put in that offer prior to having the disclosures, I imagine the listing agent's like, oh, like, you know, that, you're next days for. Because if all of that, they could get the disclosure that day after you send the offer, then you could have been gotten the disclosure signed and uploaded on the MLS.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to stand 10 toes down, stick with that. Okay, how many times the listing agent calls and say, hey, you still want to send that offer? You still want to send that offer? Make sure, okay, when we get that disclosure from her, you're able to go over it. If you didn't do it before the showing. All right, what happens when the disclosures are done correctly? Fewer surprises, less buyer's remorse. It's nothing like your buyer calling you after closing day and something's on the house. It is not.
It makes your heart go to your.
It's not. Like, you know, like some things are just fixable and whatever you can work out, but it's never a good thing. Transparent negotiations, you can, you know, get money off of the purchase price, you can negotiate credits, there's just so much more flexibility prior to, obviously, settlement, because then after that, it's about pretty much a lawsuit. Smooth contract to close process, and again, if you are the listing agent, your client is responsible for disclosing any information all the way up until settlement, not just until you get everything. So even if after you're under contract, if something happens to the bathroom or something happens to a pipe, they still have to disclose it to the buyer. Happy clients equal repeat and referral business. Trust equals more money for everyone involved. A little bit more, seller disclosures are not a burden. They're a protection tool for your client if you are the listing agent, as well as your buyer's agent. Everyone wants to save money in a transaction. Right? There's nothing like you feel like you save money in a transaction, then after closing the pipes first and now you're spending money, right? It doesn't work for anyone. You want to educate your clients, and as a buyer-loving agent, that is my top priority, to educate my clients. So that's why I add my value add. Honestly closes deals, lies with the lawsuits, that's a really good one. And you just by omitting. That one, again, just by omission. They may not have said, no, there's no leaks. But sometimes if they omit something they do know, that still falls back on you as the agent. Let human be your marketing advantage. If you lose a client because of it, you just gotta take that on the chin and be like, it was worth it in the long run. You'll get more clients later on. Okay, so this is the other part. Obviously, if you're a listing agent, you're like, oh, if it's so easy to get the disclosures, why are they not putting them on the MLS? Well, it must not be that easy, or either some listing agents aren't doing their due diligence. So these are a few ways to get your documents signed prior to you uploading your listing to the MLS, which is when your documents should be uploaded. Either you can print a copy out and leave with your clients during the listing consultation, just like Vicky explained, sit with them in the dining room, you're going through the documents, make sure, working on your computer, doing whatever you need to for the listing, maybe marketing, advertising, social media. They need to be filling out that disclosure form. Even before you are hired, yes, that's a great point. Imagine leaving them something valuable that they will need to sell their house before they can even commit to you. So this is if you leave the disclosure there as well. And a lot of times when you do a listing appointment, most of the times afterwards, the client is gonna kind of just take another walk around their house because they don't see it real to them. They're like, wait, let me walk around and see like what's going on with the house. Is there anything I need to change, paint, update? So they're probably gonna go walk through anyway themselves, and they haven't done it in years just because they, are familiar with the house, they live there. So if they have that disclosure, they can just take a closer look at everything in the house. That's my plan. Leave the disclosure there. Obviously, sit with them during as they're filling out the disclosure. 2, use DocuSign form for tech savvy clients. I do find that for maybe like my older clients who are not so, maybe a little more seasoned, they have a little difficulty filling out the check boxes and everything like that in DocuSign, because there are so many, especially for the PA form.
And they're too close together.
Yeah,
Delaware's works, the Delaware
Yeah.
check boxes, the form on the little listing agreement, they're literally like, you have to, it's
Yeah.
hard to even click them because they're so close, you have to keep, and then you go click one and it unchecks the other, it's very annoying. So printing this out, no matter what your age, is like, it's just so much easier.
so much more efficient, yeah. And if you didn't leave one during the listing interview, you can drop one off after you are hired and then give them a deadline to get it, so that you can pick that up as well. Should I have any questions? No, okay, so we are going to go over and look at the forms for PA, New York, Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland.
It's more just so they can put their eyes on it,
I
see what it looks like.
They're
That's
two
too
different
long.
formats.
It takes 2 hours to go through the PA one by itself, so it's not to teach you guys how to fill them out, just so you can see what your form for your state looks like and know how many pages, was it 14 in PA?
Yes, for the PA.
Yeah, so, they are a tedious form, don't let that, we're not trying to glaze that over, but you have to earn your commission.
Yeah, and you have to sit when you're downtime, which is not, maybe 12 o'clock, 7 o'clock, that, and like, read this through. And a lot of times PC, or any agent or agent will ask, oh, how do I explain to my client that they have to do this, or they have to do that? And a lot of times, if you look at the documents or disclosures or contracts, the contract will explain why it's like.
The language is there.
It's helping, so you're not having to tell them, it's there, and you're just explaining it to them, maybe in like, maybe more relatable terms, but the document says so. Like here, this is one document when I first started, I printed out and I was kind of like, just trying to get really familiar with the language of it, so that when I am explaining it, I feel more confident, so I highly recommend doing that, printing it out, highlight, posting notes, whatever you have to do, just so you can make sure that you are explaining those really important sentences and phrases in the document. I also don't sit down to my clients and they go first. I know it can be kind of like, oh, sign these, we have to get that done, but making sure they were actually explaining it. Whether Zoom, phone call, whatever is easiest for you. So here, this explains what a material defect is, and maybe the normal person may not know that because they don't necessarily use that language every day. The real estate seller disclosure law requires that before an agreement of sale is signed, before you're under contract, the seller, which just goes back to our point that this needs to be filled out prior to. But before an agreement of sale is signed, the seller in a residential real estate transfer must disclose all known material defects about the property being sold that are not readily observable. So that again just explains to yourself exactly what information you need to make sure.
That's what you read to the bad listing agent that refuses to give it to you.
Yes.
I'm like, on my team in real estate, I don't approve your listing going up until the disclosures are done, and I know I've seen them with my own eyes uploaded to the document section of right. So I'm not, if you will, for lack of a better term, raising a new generation of agents that are out here being annoying and doing things improperly or ethically, right? And causing other people a hard time.
Yes.
But it's literally the law, just like getting use and occupancy.
It literally
A
says.
seller also has to get you enough, you
Yeah.
know what I mean, like in some way, shape or form, or a buyer has to sign them off, so like, you know, it's, just read it to them, you don't have to get into a personal argument, it's facts, like, we're all held to the same standard.
Yes, and it further describes material defects as, a problem with a residential real property or any portion of it, never had a significant adverse impact on the value of the property, or that involves an unreasonable risk to people on the property. I had a client purchase, wanted to put an offer on a home, and it had carbon monoxide. We didn't know initially, obviously because it's something we didn't disclose it, because that's not, people don't want to do test for that. But once we got the inspection, and they were trying to sell it as is, but we negotiated, like, this is a huge thing, they actually had a tenant living in one of the units, it was a multi-family, and so they did go ahead and get it remediated. But again, that's an unreasonable risk to people on the property, that, first of all, your tenant is living there, but that's your problem, because you're the seller, right, we're just trying to purchase the property. But, like, this needs to be addressed prior to purchase. But that's an example of something that's going on with the home that no one knew about. Maybe people, I mean, they also didn't have carbon monoxide detectors, so
That was a whole
okay, right, that was, which also people, so, that's it. But again, being educated yourself, like, we can't use this, I didn't know that they were supposed to have this, I didn't know. Educate yourself as much as possible, you have tests, you have myself, and a lot of it comes just with the experience of like having some folks, having some clients, you experience different things, so don't feel guilty that you don't know everything about every house, but you have the duty to educate yourself as much as possible. Alright, so for the most part, this also discusses, what parties or what sellers do not have to disclose information, right? If you are an executor, administrator, or trustee, and you are like selling a property or, like a deceased family member. That's pretty much when you don't have to sell this, because if I'm selling property, my mom should have been Oklahoma for 20 years, I don't know anything about the property, right? I'm not. But if I did know some information about the house, I would disclose that, but though they're not responsible. However, if you are an investor, you know, you bought a property, lived in, you still are obligated to share the information about the property. Let's just get a look at the format of the disclosure. There's a lot of spaces for him to explain if there was a leak. Okay, tell us a little bit more about the leak. Water infiltration, like it says, explain, and yes, answers here.
This is the part Vicky was talking about, like if they check yes for anything, each section gives you a few lines to elaborate. Also, you can attach an addendum in some way, shape, or form.
There is a specific addendum
Oh, yeah,
for
Pennsylvania,
the,
there is, yeah.
yeah.
For Pennsylvania, there's a specific addendum. For the other states, if you run out of room or something, or a list of upgrades or renovations, then don't be afraid to slide an extra addendum and put it on there, you know?
And here's the area where it doesn't necessarily have to be a material defect, but any repairs or additions that they add to the house structurally, they can add it here as well. Permits is a whole other thing, especially in Philadelphia.
Teonna, you might run out of time to go look at all the rest of them, because I know there's starting some kind of, it's to be here, you're understanding.
Scroll through those, this is New York.
Whatever states or state your license, is, state time, yeah, and you're gonna see, like, you know, how some states are super thorough, like the Pennsylvania disclosures and the Delaware ones are pretty thorough. Maryland's like, is the house still standing? Great, you know what I mean, New York, their disclosure is more about fair housing than the material defects of the house. They're not required to give all those material defects in the house. Yeah.
Any questions about that? And since I did remind them to look for the emails, register.
There's an email went out about registering for a special extra PC class next Monday night. That is gonna be life changing, so do not miss it.
And the link to schedule your monthly check-in is here in the chat. And the chat, make sure you do that. Again, if you are newly onboarded, like the past 1 or 2 weeks, or if you haven't been fully onboarded, you do not have to schedule this check-in. This is only if you've been here and you're ready to talk about your goals for May, make sure you schedule that.
And then, great job.